This is the Interested Interview. I am your host, JJ Clarke. Today I am discussing surfboard shaping. And to help me with that task is Shaun Nicholas. He is the owner of Coded Surfboards in Ennistymon County Clare. Shaun, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing, man?
Not too bad. Listen, I have to ask, because people will notice your accent is a little bit different. You're from South Africa.
That's correct, yeah.
How did you end up in Ireland on the west coast making surfboards?
That's all. I was actually living in the UK at one stage, and I had a couple of friends from South Africa that lived over in Lamination.
Very good.
So I travelled through Indonesia and around the world, and then ended up coming back to Ireland to visit them. And I never left.
How long ago was that?
That's probably 21 years ago.
Madness.
Yeah.
And how does one get into surfboard shaping? How did you start? Did you have a carpentry background?
No, well, being a surfer for almost 30 years now, I suppose I've always had an interest in surfboards. And then when I actually moved over to Ireland, I was living with a gentleman called Ian Johnson, and he was the local shaper as well. And he was from my hometown in South Africa as well. So he used to shape my surfboard. So basically I was in the shaping room with him all the time, because obviously he was making my boards, and we lived together as well. So that's where the interest started I started to gain interest that way. And then when Ian stopped making surfboards, I started making boards.
Right.
I took it from there.
And can you take me through the process of making a surfboard?
Well, nowadays what we do is we use a foam, either polyurethane or EPS. So you start off with that, the core product, which is the foam core. Some of those foam cores come in blank form, so they're actually almost pre-done,
Right.
And then you shape it back by hand, or either use a CNC machine, to actually shape that board back, And then you go into the glassing stage of that board, where you're putting the glass fiber onto it, laminating it with resin. There's quite a process to it, but that's basically how you start off with the foam core.
What alterations are you making to that initial core?
Oh, well, I mean, you look at a blank. We call them a blank. The foam core that we're talking about is the terminology we use is the blank. So when you look at a blank, it just looks like a big block of foam.
Right.
There's no shape or form really to it apart from a curve in it. So you really are shaping a fully three-dimensional object out of that core, that blank. So that process, hand shaping wise, could take anything up to 4 hours, 5 hours to complete.
And are you using a handsaw? Are you using
the outline that you cut out of the board, so your outline of the board would be cut with a handsaw,
right,
or either a jigsaw, whatever you have to hand, whatever you're used to using, and then basically you what we call foiling back that board through that blank. With surf forms, it's kind of like a rasp. So you'd be using that to sort of grade back the foam,
Bear in mind that people listening won't have a strong sense of the different types of board. I suppose the different forms a board can take, and long board, short board, these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different variables when it comes to making surfboards. Like the sanding process really comes after the lamination happens. Prior to that, when you're doing the blank and you're shaping the board back, you'd be using planers and to form your surfboard. Then you'll grade it back with some sandpapers. Then it goes through the lamination phase, where you put in the resin onto the board and the fiberglass, and then only after that, then you start sanding the board back. There's a lot of different stages to it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work in making a surfboard. People don't realize that when they're buying one,
How long was it until you said, I got this, as in this is in my skill set now?
you really want to. It's hard to explain because when you first start making boards, your eyes need to get trained into looking at that three-dimensional object. The first couple of boards you make will be all over the place, and you won't even see it yourself. It's only when you come back to them later on and look at them and you go, "What was I thinking?"
Right.
But you be looking at, I say, at least 100 surfboards before you start developing a style, your own unique style about making surfboards. But yeah, easily over 100 surfboards, nothing less than that.
What's going through your head? Are you thinking about what kind of surfer is going to be using this board? Is it going to be a beginner? Does he want something really slick? Does he want something that's maneuverable on the wave?
Yes, but every time you make a surfboard, every board is different. So you have to take all this into account when someone's talking to you and ordering a surfboard. It's got to be the right thickness, the right buoyancy for them. It can't be too high performance if they are an intermediate surfer. Because it will hinder them to progress. There's so many things you have to take into account when making it. So it's really hard, and it takes a lot of years to actually get good at making the right surfboard for the individual. If you've got an intermediate surfer, or say a beginner surfer, and you give him a board with too little, what we call nowadays liters in the board. It's all measured through liters now, because everything's moved to CAD, CAM type shaping. Right. But if you give him too little liters in the board or buoyancy, then he's not going to be able to catch waves. From that, he's not going to be able to progress because he won't be able to get his ability up. So yeah, liters are very important, or buoyancy is very important in a surfboard, especially for a beginner. Right.
So how are liters? Is it just how buoyant the foam board is within water, how quickly it sinks is the measure, the liters of it?
Yeah, so let's say for argument's sake, nowadays most boards are designed and shaped on machines.
Right.
And this is where the liters came in, because the CAD software that we design these boards on will actually give you the literage of the foam core.
Wow.
Once the board is shaped. So it's become a lot easier to get the right buoyancy for the particular surfer using the CAD software these days,
Yeah.
And it does, it's become a crucial part of making surfboards.
And how was this done before CAD?
You'd be winging it. You'd have your dimensions. Right. Of your board. So let's say a surfer comes to order a board off you. He'd say, okay, I want a 6'2" surfboard, and I want that board at 19.5 inches wide, and I want it at 2.5 inches thick. Now, prior to CAD software and shaping machines, there was no real way of knowing what literage that was. You just kind of had an idea in your head of how buoyant it was going to be.
Is there surfboards out there that are made of wood, or is that a thing of the past? It's all foam now.
Well, it was a thing of the past, but in the last 10 years, there's been a sort of a massive surge in people making wooden surfboards again. Nowadays, these wooden boards are probably made from Polonia wood, but there's quite a few companies that have started up now that are making just wooden surfboards.
What's the conversation like between you and the surfer?
Sometimes, they're putting the trust in you. They just trust you fully. So there's very little conversation at times. Some customers do, talk an awful lot and try and describe what they want, but you don't always get it right. It's very, very difficult because, like I said, there's so many different variables in it. Most of the time, it's guesswork,
Do you cater towards the type of wave that will be surfed? Like big wave surfing, obviously, that's a different type of board than your beginner
sure, yeah.
board.
If you're making a board for aliens or Mullockmore up in the north, the board will be for aliens. It'll be what we call a gun. So that'll be a very narrow tail, quite long, 7'6" up, A lot of rocker in it. So the rocker is the bottom curve of the surfboard that I'm talking about.
Right.
They're a completely different board again. You need a lot of buoyancy for those boards as well, so you can paddle into those waves.
Have you made boards for those kind of big wave surfing?
Yeah, I mean, I've made quite a few of those boards. Generally, they would be over 8 foot. For Mulletmore, you'd be looking at an 8 foot to an 8'6" surfboard, and a lot of thickness in it. A lot of buoyancy. But that's just to aid the surfer to paddle into these waves. Because they're moving very quickly. There's a lot of water moving, so the surfer has to be able to catch them.
How has the shaping informed your surfing?
In the earlier days, when I surfed a lot more, this is a bit of an irony in this question, because you don't get to surf in the business that I'm in now. You're catering to surfers all the time. So when a swell's coming, you're busy.
Right.
But in the earlier days, I definitely gained a lot of experience making my own surfboards, for sure. I learned so much about surfboard shaping during that period of time when I was surfing a lot on my own surfboards. So, it's definitely a benefit. But unfortunately, you don't get to do it much these days,
Do people break a lot of surfboards down there? Are they bringing them back to you?
Surfboards break a lot, depending on... Nowadays, there's so many different composite materials out there now and certainly what I do as a surfboard shaper is I use a lot of epoxy resins and I use a lot of different materials, and the breakage has become less and less.
What is the epoxy resin, and how does that reduce breakages?
It's basically epoxy is a polymer, whereas polyester resin. So basically, 60 years ago, when surfboards first started being made out of foam, they were using polyester resins all the time.
Right.
And they still do to this day. Most surfboards are made with polyester resin, and that's where the term glassing came from. Okay, because polyester resin actually mimics glass because it breaks very easily. It can shatter as well.
Right.
Whereas epoxy resin doesn't really do that because it's an actual thermoplastic. Generally, you get a harder wearing surfboard with epoxy. All depends. As I say again, there's a lot of variables when it comes to composite materials. But yeah, epoxy is certainly it's my go-to material for making surfboards now. So, but everyone's different, A lot of shapers don't believe in it, but I do. I think it's a fantastic resin. A lot of these epoxy resins now have a very high bio content, so they're made from paper saps, and so they've got a very, very eco-friendly sort of way about them,
And being a surfer, and I think there's a strong sense that to be environmentally conscious, and even on your website it says that you're an environmentally conscious surfer and presumably surfboard maker and shaper. How much of that does that feed into your work, and presumably at times it makes your job harder?
Makes it very difficult. But then again, surfers, they're still very uneducated when it comes to this type of thing. There's a lot of different ways you can make a surfboard. You don't have to use polyurethane blank, which is very, very toxic to make. And then you're using glass fiber, it contributes a huge amount of CO2 into the atmosphere to produce. And then you're using polyester resin, which is also a very toxic material and not very good for your health. So when I started making boards, I obviously started using those materials and then progressed into flax fiber as an alternative for e-glass, which is the fiberglass. And then I started using bio-epoxies. And these epoxies, there's no vox out of them. You don't get any smell really out of them.
Really?
Yeah, so you don't. When I'm making a board, when I'm using EPS and epoxy resins, I don't really use a mask. It's only during the sanding stage that I'd have to put a mask on, you see, which is a lot better for me personally and health-wise.
Clare is an interesting place because it's just surfing seems to be a religion down there. And same in Sligo and some places across Ireland. But how does it differ in terms of I suppose people need to wetsuit up nearly every time when compared to your native South Africa?
Yes. But you get used to the cold. You know, the wetsuit technology now is so advanced that in the middle of winter, you're still really toasty in the water, you know. You're
right.
better off in the water than outside the water now these days with the wetsuit technology that's happening.
Yeah, 8 mil, 10 mil suit kind of thing, winter suits.
Well, you'd be surprised. 5 mil wetsuit will keep you very warm in the winter.
Yeah, and it doesn't sort of get in the ways of mobility. I find with the winter wetsuits, you're kind of... You almost feel like you're wearing the blubber of a walrus or something. It really discommodes you.
Another topic for your buoyancy question before. You know, you have to take all that into account as well when someone's ordering a board in the winter. You know, they order a board in the winter, you're going to add an extra liter or two to you know, counteract the weight of the wetsuit when it's wet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you've got to do all that. You've got to take all that into account, yeah? Because you're putting booties on, gloves, a hoodie, and a wetsuit. I think if you actually dunked all that into a bucket of water and weighed it afterwards, you're adding 5 kgs at least to your body mass.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely would have overlooked, especially considering that I surf in a winter wetsuit the whole year round, which sort of reveals my experience. It's really interesting to me, and even just I know surfing videos and surfboard shaping videos are sort of designed to be really aesthetically pleasing, but it strikes me that the shaping process looks incredibly relaxing and therapeutic. Is it that way, or is it? Do you see a surfboard and you think, oh, here's another one, you know, or do you think this is actually you can just kind of go somewhere else when you're shaping it in your mind, kind of thing?
There is something very magical about the whole process, especially hand shaping. When you start off with a big massive foam in front of you, and then you end up with this 3-dimensional board that's got a lovely curve to it, and you know, in the shaping rooms we have these side lights that shine over the contours of the surfboard, and when you get the shadows that are cast from those lights in perfect symmetry, it's very rewarding. I have to tell you, it's like, you know, you do get a bit of satisfaction from it,
right?
But it's like any job, you know, when you're doing it every day, it gets a bit tedious, you know. But I'm not going to lie to you. It's like any job. You know, any job's the same.
Start to finish, how long does a board take? Just an average board. Would it take?
Well, let's say a polyester board. So the original surfboards, a polyurethane foam core and polyester resin. Polyester resin sets very quickly, so you're able to finish a board a lot faster. So polyesters will probably take around about 20 hours of work.
Wow.
To complete.
So probably a three days ish.
You from start to finish, if you're doing one individual surfboard, you could probably take a week at it. You know, but you in between that, you're waiting for the resin to set, cure, to do the next phase. You know, making surfboards, if you do just one board, you'd be looking at a week. You know. That's with the weighting and all that sort of stuff for the resin to set. Epoxies now would take anything up to 25 hours and probably a week and a half to complete.
And it strikes me as there's a lot of drawing and is a very creative aspect of it, but the drawing and the mathematical element that I wouldn't associate with surfers in the surfing world, but it definitely is part of it, that you're doing dimensions, it has to be a certain width, a certain length. It's very mathematically involved.
It is, yeah. You know, prior to the CAD and CNC machines that came around, you were using templates, and you would obviously measure out the surfboard in each foot. So from the tail to the nose, you'd mark off each foot of the surfboard and then draw lines across it and then measure it out and put your templates on it, cut it out. You're constantly measuring throughout the whole process, you know. But now with the CAD and CAM, CNC stuff, you can sit in front of a computer, but it's the same thing. It's all numbers.
And I suppose it's just inputs. It's this width, this length, and you just type it in, and then it's chopped out.
And I mean, there's a lot of surfers that come in with old boards, magic surfboards that they talk about. These magic boards, and you've got to copy these boards for them. So again, to copy that board, you're measuring over at least 200 points in the surfboard, and trying to write all this down, all this input, And then you've got to try and remake that board. So it's all measurements, all numbers.
And with just on that, magic boards. What is that a phrase in surfing? Is that what is that?
There is. It's a rarity, really, because like I said before, there's so many different variables with a surfboard. The bottom curve and some. So one particular surfer might get one magic surfboard. And that happens, and it's very rare to get one of those, but it does happen. But it's very, very difficult to replicate a surfboard.
That would be one that they've had a terrific experience on, or it's just really easy to...
you get them, so each individual surfer would have at least, in a lifetime of surfing, would probably have maybe 3 or 4 magic boards.
That would just sit perfectly for their dimensions.
Perfectly fit the curve of the wave for them. Whatever way they stand on a board with their legs spread apart like that, they just be this bit of magic. So it's hard to explain to a person that doesn't surf, but there definitely is that magic board that comes around every now and again.
Very interesting. Fantastic. Well, Shaun Nicholas, thank you very much for joining me on the show. That is Shaun Nicholas, owner of Coded Surfboards in Ennistymon, County Clare.
Thank you very much.